Okay, hello everyone again. We will get started on today's webinar, Decoding the Most Recent Executive Orders. My name is Maura Perry. I am part of the commercial team at Shapiro. I am going to be today's co-pilot. Today's pilot of our presentation will be Chris Carlton. He is our Director of Regulatory Compliance and Import Operations. Before we do that, just a few things. We ask that all questions be held until the end of today's presentation. We understand that these executive orders are definitely very complicated, and we want to answer everything that we can, but please hold them. You can submit them on the questions panel that's available on your dashboard. If a question cannot be answered or requires additional info, we might need to follow up with you after today's session. We will send you a direct email because we have all of your contact information. And finally, the presentation today will be recorded and it will be sent out to all attendees with a copy of our PDF and a survey to complete within 1 to 2 days. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Chris. Chris, take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, Maura. Thank you everyone for joining. We wanted to have the webinar today to break down all of the executive orders that were announced in the last 7 to 10 days to try and make it a little more digestible and easier to understand and understand how these executive orders are going to impact your future shipments. It definitely felt like we had a flurry of new tariffs. We had the additional reciprocal tariffs added. That one's going to be the biggest one that's going to have the biggest impact to the most people. Brazil got its own executive order. Copper got added to Section 232, and just for the cherry on top, Canada also got an increase. We are going to start with talking about the reciprocals, and one thing to keep in mind as we go through the details of what is in this reciprocal executive order, the thing that's been helping me is a lot of the things in this executive order around the reciprocal tariffs mirror what we know and what we've seen with the universal 10% reciprocal tariff. So a lot of the rules still apply, a lot of the exemptions still apply. These are very similar executive orders, and these reciprocal tariffs will act similar to how the universal 10% tariff is working today. Before we get into the details, I'm not sure how many people remember. I know I was at Shapiro, remember it very well because we still feel the burn from it. But on April 2nd, in that executive order, they gave us an in-transit exemption. And at the time, the language in that executive order was vague at best, and left a lot of open-ended questions. And it wasn't until the middle to end of May, so 6 to 8 weeks after the announcement was made, that CBP actually issued guidance and specifics on what that in-transit exemption actually meant. So the good news here is we actually understand what they mean by the in-transit exemption. So for the reciprocal tariffs that were announced on July 31st, the effective date is August 7th. And the in-transit exemption means any cargo that is loaded on the final vessel destined for the US before August 7th will meet that in-transit exemption. So a couple examples to make it a little clear. If your cargo is loading at origin and that vessel is shipping directly from origin to the United States, that cargo has to load that vessel prior to August 7th in order to qualify for the in-transit exemption. If your shipment happens to have a transship, meaning it in a foreign port unloads one vessel and loads another vessel, the last transship port where the cargo loads the last vessel destined for the US, that loading has to happen prior to April 7th in order for the cargo to meet the in-transit exemption. If you have cargo that loads your origin prior to August 7th and transships after August 7th, it does not qualify for the in-transit exemption. So those were some details that we have a little further clarification on this go around. The in-transit exemption also only refers to the vessel mode. CBP clarified that air shipments, rail shipments from Canada, and border crossings do not qualify for the in-transit exemption. So the only things that would meet the in-transit rule are cargo that loaded the final vessel destined for the US prior to August 7th. And if the shipment does meet the in-transit exclusion, the universal 10% reciprocal rate will still apply. All right, so that's the in-transit. Let's get into a little of the details and what is covered in the reciprocal executive order. So Annex 1 to the July 31st executive order lists all of the countries and their specific rate that will be captured in this executive order. The rates outlined in Annex 1 will replace the country-specific rates announced in the April 2nd executive order. So if you remember on April 2nd, when the reciprocal tariffs were first announced, the announcement included, I want to say it was almost every country had a specific rate in that April 2nd announcement. The rates in the Annex 1 to this July 31st order will replace any of those rates that were listed in the April 2nd executive order. If you have a product from a country that's not listed in this July 31st executive order, then they will get the universal 10%. One thing to add, Maura's going to send this presentation after. Anywhere that you see the hyperlink, so the Annex 1, if you click on this, it'll take you right to the executive order, and then you can locate the Annex 1 there. So these countries that are listed, named in this executive order and their specific rates can be found in Annex 1. And like I said at the beginning, when we first started talking about reciprocals, this executive order mirrors a lot of that April 2nd executive order. So a lot of the same rules and exemptions still apply. In this executive order, there are exemptions for donations, civil aircraft, information materials. There's also the exemption for Annex 2 to that April 2nd executive order. We all know, or it's pretty common at this point, when we say Annex 2, we're referring to that April 2nd executive order that listed out a laundry list of HTS numbers that were excluded from the reciprocal tariffs. This executive order also, if the item is listed in Annex 2, it will be excluded from this executive order as well. Quick point while I'm on annexes, each executive order is going to have its own annexes, so it gets a little confusing when we start talking about Annex 1, Annex 2. In that example, I was talking about the April 2nd executive order, but for this July 31st executive order, the actual HTS numbers for each country will be listed in Annex 2. So we're familiar with 9903.01.25 today as the universal 10%. The HTSs that are listed in Annex 2 to the July 31st order will replace the 9903.01.25 for the universal 10%. And again, if your country's not listed in Annex 2 of this executive order, then it will get 9903.01.25 for the universal 10%. If that wasn't complicated enough, India got thrown a curveball last week when the executive order was originally announced on July 31st. India was 25%. They got a bump last week to 50%. And because nothing can be easy, there's now a whole separate in-transit exemption just for India. That in-transit exemption has an effective date of August 27th. So if your cargo, same as we talked about on the in-transit slide, if it loads that final vessel prior to August 27th, it will not get the 50%. If it loads after August 7th, it will get 25%. So if your cargo from India loads prior to August 7th, it will just get the baseline 10%. If it loads the vessel from August 7th through August 26th, it will get the 25%. And if it loads the vessel after August 27th, it will get 50%. And unfortunately, we're not quite done with the complexities with this executive order with the reciprocals. So Europe, they had to make a little more complex. So goods from Europe will have a total of 15%. So their reciprocal rate will be 15%. However, that 15% will now include the HTS column 1 duty rate. So the column 1 duty rate, every commodity has an HTS number. Every HTS number has a column 1 duty rate. That 15% against goods from the EU will include that column 1 duty rate. So as an example, if your commodity's column 1 duty rate is 6%, then the additional reciprocal tariff that would be owed would be 9%. If your column 1 duty rate happens to be over 15%, 16% as an example, then no additional duty will be owed for the reciprocal tariff. Now, I know I have some booze folks on this call, and wine and spirits is a good example to look at this a little deeper. The column 1 duty rate for wine and spirits is cents per liter. So it makes it a little more complex to calculate. But as an example, if we look at just white wine under 14%, the duty rate is 6.3 cents per liter. Just using an example to make our math easy, if we had an entry line that had 1,000 liters and $1,000 value, the first thing we would do is calculate our duty. So we'd say 6.3 cents times 1,000 liters, and we would get $63. Then we take that $63 and divide it by our invoice line, which in this case is $1,000, to give us a percentage, and that would give us 6.3%. So the additional duty owed would be the 6.3% minus the 15%. So our reciprocal tariff rate would be 8.7%. So EU's got a little layer of complexity, but the base line is it includes that 15% is inclusive of the column 1 duty rate, and if the column 1 duty rate exceeds 15%, then no additional reciprocal tariff is owed. Okay, we're going to move on to Brazil. Brazil got a double whammy, so it got its own executive order. Brazil is named in the reciprocal executive order with 10%, but this is a separate executive order just for Brazil. I think of this as if your goods come from China, you get the reciprocal 10% under 99030125 for China, but you also get the IEPA 20% that was added in March under 99030124. So there's 2 HTS numbers for China. That's kind of what's happening here with Brazil. So before we get into the details, again, another fun in-transit exemption, and because things can't be easy, this has a different effective date of August 6th. But the same in-transit rules apply to this executive order. So we're really focused on when does the cargo load the final vessel destined for the U.S. That's going to determine your applicability date. And again, air, rail shipments from Canada and border crossings do not qualify for the exemption. If the cargo does qualify for the exemption, then just the 10% reciprocal will apply, and exclusion HTS, if it doesn't meet the in-transit exemption, will be 99030178. All right, so looking at the details, this executive order does call for 40% against Brazilian origin goods. Again, this is in conjunction with the 10% reciprocal tariff. So they'll operate independently of each other, but both included on Brazilian origin goods. The applicable HTS will be 99030177. And like I said, you'll have two HTS numbers now for Brazil. The positive with this executive order is there are a slew of HTS numbers that are excluded, and those can be found in Annex 1. So if your commodity does have a baseline HTS that is listed in Annex 1, it could be excluded under 99030181. Just like our reciprocal tariffs, a lot of exclusions, or same exclusions for this still apply. So you have your exclusions for donations, information materials, and civil aircraft. This also has the stacking rule as well as the reciprocal tariff. So what's the stacking rule? The stacking rule is if your cargo is eligible for Section 232, which is now at 50%, it is exempt from the reciprocal tariffs as well as this Brazilian executive order. So you pay the 232 duties on the commodity, the Brazilian executive order is excluded and the reciprocal tariff is excluded. And like most executive orders, if you're lucky enough to have cargo that meets the Chapter 98 provisions, any of those, then this will be exempt and the goods can be brought in duty-free. Speaking of Section 232, copper is now part of the 232 equation. Section 232 is at 50%. There is no in-transit exemption for copper. It went live August 1st, so any goods brought in subject to the copper Section 232 qualify. And copper operates exactly like steel and aluminum operate under Section 232, meaning you can break out the copper content. If your good is not wholly made of copper, it can be broken down into two lines. So your first line will be the copper content, and you will pay the Section 232 duties of 50% only on the copper content of that good. And then you'll have a second entry line for the non-copper content. And that second entry line will be eligible for the reciprocal tariff, and if Brazil applies, the Brazilian tariff as well. So copper is just like steel and aluminum. It could be broken out between non-content and copper content, and you pay the Section 232 duties on the copper content and the reciprocal and/or Brazilian tariffs on the non-copper content. And all of the HTS numbers that are now covered by copper being added to Section 232 can be found at the hyperlink there, and that is in Section B of the copper executive order. All right, last but not least, Canada gets a little tweak. The current executive order against Canada was announced in March, and it gave a 25% duty rate. The only thing changing here is that 25% is being increased to 35%. The 35% HTS remains the same at 99030110. It's just getting an increase to 35%, and there's no in-transit exemption. It went live August 1st, and the good news is USMCA qualifying goods still will be allowed to be entered duty-free. So as long as the goods qualify for USMCA and we have the appropriate paperwork, it can still be brought in duty-free. Okay, so that's the overview of the four executive orders we saw in the past week. I do have a couple of frequently asked questions that we're seeing a lot across the board, and I wanted to go over those before we turn the floor over to Q&As, just in case this helps answer a lot of questions. So my cargo departed origin on August 2nd. It did transship on August 9th, but since it loaded prior to the executive order announcement, the reciprocal rates do not apply to my shipment, right? I get this question at least every day, at least once a day, and unfortunately, no. The reciprocal rates, the in-transit exemption for the reciprocal rates apply only to cargo that loaded the last vessel destined for the US. I've seen my bill of lading shows this date, it was in the port this date, it was any excuse under the book, but unfortunately it's based on that loading date on the last vessel destined for the US. So my shipment actually meets the in-transit exemption. Does this mean I don't have to pay additional duties? If your shipment meets the in-transit exemption, you will still pay the baseline 10% that's been in effect since April 5th. So you won't have to pay the reciprocal duty, but you will pay the 10%. The country I import from was listed in both the April 2nd executive order and the July 31st executive order with different rates. Which one applies? So the July 31st executive order, those rates will replace anything that was initially named in the April 2nd executive order. If your country is not listed in the July 31st executive order, then you will pay the baseline 10% duty. I have lumber from Brazil. Lumber is excluded from reciprocal tariffs in the April 2nd executive order under Annex 2. What tariffs are my cargo subject to? So if the commodity is listed in that April 2nd Annex 2 and is excluded from the reciprocal tariffs, even though if the cargo is from Brazil, that 40% would still apply. So you wouldn't pay the reciprocal tariffs, but you'll pay the Brazilian tariffs because those are separate, independent executive orders. All right, a few more. Do the reciprocal tariffs or the Brazilian executive order apply to articles subject to Section 232? What about articles that are not wholly of steel, aluminum, and copper? So this is what we talked about in the copper executive order. You're able, there's the reciprocal executive order and the Brazilian executive order both provide the stacking provision, which means if the cargo is subject to 232, you only have to pay the 232 duties and not the reciprocal or not the Brazilian tariffs. If it's not wholly made of copper, steel, or aluminum, you can break it out on 2 entry lines, only pay the 232 duty on the steel, aluminum, or copper content, and then you'll pay the reciprocal and or Brazilian tariffs on the non-steel, aluminum, copper content. All right, last but not least, because I know that this is a hot topic, Canada was increased to 35% for non-USMCA eligible goods. What about Mexico? And tell me your crystal ball because you know everything that's going to happen about China. Mexico, we found out July 31st, I think they mentioned there would be a 90-day pause on it. So we don't know what that 90-day pause means, what happens after. We will have to wait for an additional executive order to be issued to learn what happens with Mexico and China. See the rumblings. Tomorrow is supposed to be the end of the 90-day pause for China. We have nothing concrete. We have nothing rumored. We have to wait for that executive order to know more. And with that, I'm going to flip it over to Maura.
Woohoo! I don't know about you guys, but I definitely feel like I've learned a lot about these executive orders. So thank you, Chris. I'll let you take a little breather real quick, get some water. I did have some questions that came in, so we are going to go through the ones that came through. Just if there is anything super specific about it that has to do with like a shipment or a company, we might have to handle those on the side. So try to keep them a little bit more general on this call, and then we'll be happy. Chris would be happy to assist you on the side afterwards. Very happy. We love answering questions. Okay, so the first one is from Brittany. Is the 40% on Brazilian goods under IEEPA or a different law?
It is. He did use the IEEPA law, so it is under IEEPA.
Okay, perfect. This one is from Sarah. If we don't see our HTS numbers in Annex 2, does that mean that they're not affected by this EO and still fall under original, or does this apply to everything from those countries?
This is what I mentioned in the PowerPoint, that Annex 2, each executive order has Annex 2s. So I'm not sure which Annex 2 she's referring to, but I'm going to assume she's talking about the July 31st one with the country-specific rates that were applied. And can you reread that question for me?
Yes. If we don't see our HTS numbers in Annex 2, does that mean that they're not affected by this executive order and still fall under the original, or does this apply to everything from those countries?
Okay, I changed my mind. I think she's talking about the April 2nd executive order and that Annex 2. And that Annex 2 was the one that listed all of the HTS numbers that were exempt from the reciprocal tariff and what later became the universal 10% tariff. So if their HTS number is included in that April 2nd executive order, they are exempt from the July 31st executive order. So they will not have to pay the reciprocal tariffs.
Okay, perfect. Next question. For Section 232 copper, will there be an exclusion for U.S. copper returning to the U.S. in part of a product? Today, we do not see an exclusion.
Yeah, there was no exclusion. So I'm just talking myself through it. The U.S. content that we know today is the 20% for the reciprocal tariff. There was no U.S. exclusion in the copper portion of the executive order.
Okay, perfect. Next one. Can we expect any additions to Annex 2 from April in the near future?
I should have put this one on my frequently asked questions because I do get this a lot. You know, it's at this day and age, if this year has taught me anything, I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm probably going to be wrong. So I shy away from making predictions about what will happen. We haven't heard anything about any additions being added to Annex 2. Anything in this climate is possible, but there's nothing. And we try and shy away from the rumor mill too, that there's nothing indicating that additional items are going to be added to Annex 2. It's not impossible, but there's nothing, no rumblings at this time.
Okay, perfect. Next question. Can you please discuss how the elimination of the de minimis exemption later this month will affect trade?
Oh, that's a good question. That's one I want to make sure I have details on because there's some complexities with that executive order. So Maura, you star that one and let me know who asked that one.
Okay, no problem. Lisa, we will be following up with you.
Sorry, Lisa, I do have questions before I outspeak on that one.
It's fine. Now you just get to engage with him on the side, so it's great. Okay, next question. Won't hold you to this, but what is the guess that the new tariff percentage will be for China?
I'm at least happy I gave myself the prefaces of I don't know in the presentation. And I really don't want to guess because I literally have no idea. It could be anything. It could be at the whim of anything. I have heard nothing. My gut tells me if I had to guess that by the time you have Section 301 still in play, by the time you have the 20% IEEPA for March, and by the time you have the 10% reciprocal, you know, most goods for Section 301 are 25%, so you're already over that 50% mark. I would be surprised if anything additional gets added, but anything is possible in this climate.
Okay, perfect. This one is a little bit of a different one. I love it. What does the skinny mean?
Oh God, well, I'm put on the spot, so I'm gonna have to be honest. I stole that from Margie Shapiro. She always loves to use that as just the details. The details skinnied up to make it a little more clear. So you can thank Margie for that one.
Oh man, I love that. Okay, next question. If my shipment transships on the final vessel prior to cutoff, but I do not want to claim the exemption, is that possible? example, column 1 is 8% plus 10% equals 18% versus 15% flat for the EU. I may have lost that one.
Oh, that's a really good question that I haven't had yet. That best, it's going to work both ways. That cutoff date, that effective date, is a hard and fast rule, and it works in the positive and negative. So, technically speaking, you can't, even if you qualify for it, you can't opt out of it if it falls within the rules. So I think that's a two-way street. I love that question. I have not heard that yet, and it's a great point. But it's not a pick and choose. It's a hard rule of whether it meets it or not. So I think that would be the rare example of it. Well, I guess it works against you either way, but to me, that's a hard and fast rule that you would stick by. So unfortunately, you would pay the extra percentage rate if it met that exemption.
Okay, awesome. Great question, Mark. All right, next one. Assuming the border crisis is resolved, do we have any idea what the reciprocal tariff on Canada and Mexico would be?
I couldn't even begin to answer it. Yeah, I couldn't even begin to answer that question. If there was a complete resolution and everyone's happy, my gut would just tell me that USMCA governs, and we're kind of back to operating the way we were when USMCA, or with only USMCA being active. So if the goods weren't eligible, you would pay the baseline duty rate. But that one's open-ended. Anything could happen.
Okay, perfect. She did supply a little bit more information afterwards, but Brittany, we'll go ahead and we'll follow up with you afterwards, just so that we can make sure that we have all the clarification. Okay, next one. Any updates regarding the tariffs on pharmaceuticals imported into the U.S.? I recall previous news mentioning that these tariffs could potentially reach up to 250%.
Yeah, it's really the same situation as Mexico and China at this moment. Like we can't really make a determination or plan or advise customers without an executive order. So until we have something concrete, it's kind of a news game of what's going on, and really anything could come of it.
Okay, perfect. Any updates on the litigations and appeal that is going through the courts on the legality of imposing these tariffs using the national security law? Any chance of a result?
Yeah, great question. I think we're supposed to hear something this week, if my memory serves me correctly. Now, what that means, who knows? I would highly suspect any decision being appealed and kind of dragging along through the court. So I'm not certain that even if we get a ruling at this point, it's going to mean anything substantial in the short term. I think we're still there's still some legal processes that would happen before importers started seeing any benefits from a decision.
All right, great. Next question. If anti-dumping duties are greater than the reciprocal tariff, does the reciprocal tariff still apply?
It does. So the reciprocal tariff is in addition to any anti-dumping or countervailing duties assessed against the product / shipper. So unfortunately, the stacking rule does not include anti-dumping. You will pay anti-dumping on top of reciprocal tariffs.
Okay. Next question. Have you heard if Trump is willing to let countries renegotiate again? And have you heard anything about removing tariffs on natural resources that are not grown in the U.S.?
I think it goes back to our common theme. Without executive orders, all of the talk about what's happening and going on, or what could happen, we've seen so many times things make their way through the news headlines that never come to fruition, and it's just kind of a waiting game. We really have to have an executive order in hand to understand what will happen or what the impacts would be. Um, I would say in this current climate, anything is negotiable. I think anything at any moment could change. I mean, look at what happened just in the past 7 to 10 days with Brazil and India. Brazil kind of out of nowhere got an additional added. India got bumped to 50%. Like, I think the reverse could happen if a country had a favorable negotiation. I could see it being excluded or removed. I think anything's on the table. It's just hard to predict or theorize until we have an actual executive order.
Okay, great. Is the reciprocal tariff replacing the 10% base tariff, or does it stack with the 10% base tariff?
Yep. So that reciprocal tariff, the reciprocal rates that were announced in the July 31st order, those will replace the universal 10%. So that those reciprocal rates replace the 10%. If the country you are importing from is not listed in that July 31st executive order, then they will get just the baseline 10%.
Okay, great. This one's a little bit different too. I like it. Is anyone else afraid that all of these programming changes are going to break ACE? I know that all of our brokers are struggling to get the system to accept larger entries right now.
Whoever asked that question, great question. It may not be. Yeah, I'm also worried about customs programming it, and I'm also worried about customs being able to have any kind of control over these changes. I mean, when you get down into the nitty gritty, even what we discussed today, I mean, there's so many implications, right? Like the in-transit exemption for the reciprocal starts August 7th, Brazil's August 6th, India's August 7th and August 27th, and air, rail, and border don't apply, and. So maybe not breaking ACE, but in terms of enforceability, I definitely see some potential hurdles with all of this, all of these changes, and they come in rapid fire. So it's one thing to program the system to transmit it to ACE. It's another thing for ACE and CBP to be able to understand and capture all those changes. So great question. I could see, I see the concern there.
Great. I love that one. It's like a trickle down. You think about it later.
I know, yeah.
Kay's already way down the line. Okay. All right, next question. If the courts rule that tariffs under IEEPA are illegal outside of the executive branch authority, do you think importers would be able to submit PSCs to request refunds on reciprocal tariffs?
God, I hope not. I pray that that's not the situation. If something, let's pretend for a second that it's deemed illegal and everyone's okay with it, and that's how we're moving forward. I'm hopeful. Customs has, let's just focus on the reciprocals, right? And we're looking at 99030125 as the 10% HTS. In my mind, it would be easy for customs, maybe not on the wallet, but easy programmatically speaking, to automatically refund that amount. Very similar to back in the day. Oh God, here I am. I'm back in the day age. With like GSP, when it got reinstated, as long as a GSP flag indicator was in the entry, the refunds were issued automatically. So I would hope that something similar to that would happen, because if you think about it, I mean, this 99030125 number has been on every single entry for over 4 months now. The amount of the sheer volume of PSCs, even if it were announced today that that's illegal, would be beyond overwhelming. on CBP. So my gut tells me if something happened, they're able to issue those refunds automatically, programmatically. At least that's what I'm going to keep praying for.
Okay, perfect. Okay, this one's a little long, so hang with me. There was an executive order written for secondary tariffs for anyone importing Venezuelan oil, which I don't believe has been applied to anyone. I did not see one for secondary tariffs for buyers of Russian energy, and yet India was hit with the tariff. Was there an executive order for Russian energy purchasers, and what law was India tariffed under?
Asking me specifics there. So the executive order that there was, and the only named country in there was India. So that was the only one that was named in that executive order. There was an executive order against it, and India was the only party named.
Okay, perfect. There are in-transit exemptions for the reciprocal tariffs for ocean shipments. Are there any exemptions for air shipments?
Nope, air shipments, unfortunately, do not qualify for the in-transit exemption. So what that means is, again, I've seen this a lot. My cargo was at the airport, the flight got delayed, it departed August 6th and got here August 7th, so it doesn't fall. Like, all of that has been thrown at us, but Customs made it clear that air shipments, rail, Canadian rail border crossings, and truck border crossings do not qualify. The only shipments that qualify for the in-transit exemption is cargo that loads a final vessel prior to the effective date.
Okay, great, thank you. Next one, can you talk about the transshipment duty and its interpretation?
Yeah, I actually specifically left that off of the presentation. And the reason I left that off is because I hate that word transship, because for most importers in the brokerage world, the word transship to us means it gets off one vessel and loads another vessel. In that executive order, there is what they call, or what was called in that executive order, transshipping. And what they define that as is goods from one country being sent to another country and shipped from that other country to avoid the specific duties levied against the origin country. That one, to me, it had a lot of gray areas. I think it's going to be very circumstantial. I don't think we're ever going to see I think the duty rate on that is 40% if goods are found to be subject to that. I think that's going to be a case-by-case basis, like through a CF 28 Customs issues additional information. Maybe they have wind of a supplier doing this or a shipper in one country doing this. So I start looking more broadly at that one shipper. But I do think that's going to be a circumstantial basis, and really shipment by shipment. I don't see that having broad application. I know the HTS number for that, I think, is 99030201. I don't see us ever using that and claiming that, just because I think it's going to be a very specific case where that gets found to be happening.
Okay, great. That actually was our last question. So calling all last calls for any questions. Obviously, if you have them after the fact, we encourage you, and I'm not being sarcastic, he really does love answering the and both the PDF version and also a recording of it. So Chris, do you want to? Oh, his internet just died. Okay, well, it's perfect.
Yep, I'm here.
It's back.
Sorry.
It's back. All right, it's back. Okay.
I did miss everything you said.
It's okay. It was just a nice little wrap up. So I just basically was reminding them that we were sending out the presentation about 24 hours, and if they had any questions, just to reach out to the email that is up on the screen right now.
Yep, perfect.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending today. We're so glad that you joined us. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. So have a great rest of your Monday.